So, for the last 3 years, I've been a professor at Berkeley School of Theology, where I teach courses related to leadership. My branch of theology is action theology, um, or practical theology, which means I focus on how pastors and leaders of churches and nonprofit organizations, community organizations, how they apply their theology, their belief about who God is, and as a Christian, it would be their belief about who Jesus is, to real life experiences in community, in church life, and in other places where they serve or live out their faith. For me, that's practical theology. So, faith in action. And so I get this question quite often, and I thought this would be a good time to share my response to the question. What is the question? The question is, should pastors speak about the sin of public figures? And I can give you the simple answer to that. Yes, absolutely. Now you might ask, what is my basis for that? I would have to find some sort of theological grounding for my answer. And certainly I'm going to do that right now. Now, when we think about preaching, starting there isn't a single example in Old or New Testament of what preaching is. There are multiple examples which we draw from that allow us to build upon in the modern time what preaching is. So in the Old Testament, we draw from the example of the prophets as they proclaimed. And in the New Testament, we draw from, we draw from the writers of the New Testament, the writers of the gospel. They're proclaiming, and Jesus himself, as depicted by those writers of the gospels, his proclamations. And then you see Paul and Peter's writings and other writings in the New Testament also are demonstrations of those proclamations. We bring all of that together in the pulpit or in the public square, and we call that preaching. So it's not limited to Sunday morning. It is a lived practical experience that we share with others, and some of us are called to do that. I believe that I'm called to do that in the classroom as a professor. Occasionally, I preach from the pulpit, but there are those who are full time pastors, um, using even some controversial names. Let me call them out right now. Going by the title apostle or bishop, not so controversial, but prophet. So I'm calling upon them. I'm calling upon them in the public square and in the pulpit to think carefully about the answer to this question. Should you call out the sin of public figures? Let me give you the basis for why it is that I'm going to challenge anyone who thinks that it is not the place of the pastor or the prophet or the apostle to do such a thing. When we observe proclamation in the Old Testament and the New Testament, there is something that we see throughout all of it. Proclamation is not morally neutral. To proclaim, to speak publicly as one speaking with the voice, the embedded voice, the expression of God, it is not morally neutral. It leans and bends towards God's moral, God's ethic, bringing that into voice, into the world in a very practical way. So to be a proclaimer today and aspire to be morally neutral, those two things are antithetical. They don't go together. So yesterday, the President of the United States posted on Truth Social a depiction of former President Obama and former First Lady Michelle Obama as primates. In a climate where racial tensions are being leveraged and heightened, and at the highest level of government, This is the depiction. Should we remain silent or morally neutral about that? Let me say something about racism. Racism is antithetical to the gospel of Jesus Christ. Therefore, it's antithetical to the practice of Christianity. Therefore, anyone who claims to be a Christian but ascribes also to racialization of God's creation is antithetical to the gospel of Jesus Christ. Now, should we remain morally neutral? Or should we be proclaimers ourselves of the truth? Is there any example of this? Old Testament examples abound. Nathan confronts David about his abuse of power. Elijah confronts Ahab about state sanctioned injustice. Amos, Isaiah, Micah, they address the issue of economic exploitation and violence. Key insight from this: public power produces public moral consequences. The proclaimer, knowing that, challenges in the moment, challenges the abuse of power by any figure, religious or non. Well, what did Jesus have to say about things like this? Jesus confronted the religious elites, Matthew 23, even confronted Herod himself, a political ruler. So if we are walking prophetically in the name of Jesus, should we not do the same? I think we should. And I think in our current climate, there are plenty of moments that we can draw upon as examples of people in power, political figures, who are, who are behaving in ways that are antithetical to the gospel we proclaim. Now is the time. Now is the time. If we remain morally neutral, how can we call ourselves followers of Jesus? Speak up. All you apostles and prophets and pastors and bishops, is it a title that you're concerned with or a calling? If not now, then when?